we have now such a small window of opportunity to stop what is going on in Gaza. There's no internet now. There's no communication. There are no journalists left. We don't know the extent to which the massacre is now increasing. This is the final solution. Like a lot of people say to me, like the comment that Fee was talking about, we understand like BRICS countries have to act with discretion. Discretion about what? About the fact that the country they're supporting and doing trade with and supplying arms to are committing a genocide. If those populations can understand that their governments need to change their policies in order to enable parts of the world to actually survive and for there to be real progression as humanity, as mankind, then there is still a chance. That's the thing. There is still a chance with the BRICS countries for change. There's no chance for change, not for many generations. Fee, I don't know if you have that same opinion in the West.
We need to be critical. We need to be the ones pushing the opportunities we have to face that. Otherwise, what's going to happen is you're just going to have multiple powers that pretty much behave as immorally, as completely just devoid of humanity as the West was doing. And perhaps they're a little bit more cooperative. Perhaps it is more of a soft power. Perhaps they're just, they have the facade down of how they are. But at the end of the day, behind the scenes, they are still acting in a very capitalist, very selfish type of way where there is no equity. There is not going to be more equity in this world. We can't even suggest that as powerful states, China and Russia, should do something more than what they're doing. Not even just that they should at least stop the economic relationships that they have with a genocidal entity. How is that so much to ask?
When you look at BRICS, like what is the fear here? It's like Susan Abelhauer spoke about this learned helplessness, where no one wants to act first. But at the end of the day, what happens? Revolution doesn't come from a majority, it comes from a minority. It comes from someone who inspires the majority eventually.
I can say, oh my God, BRICS countries it's a new world. China, Russia, they're going to defeat the hegemonic West. I can make 20 videos titled like all these things about that.
You'll get a lot of subscribers and you'll get a lot of views.
Yeah,
I've seen it.
But that's the new thing though, right? Isn't that the new thing? So my point is it's become almost popular on the other end to just feed on this other side. But with the nuance, that's never popular. And I think that's our job right now, is to go deep into that nuance.
We're not trying to destroy hope, we're trying to give hope. We're trying to say by holding these countries to account, there is potential for them to act against what is happening in Palestine, Lebanon, Syria, Iraq, Yemen, and potentially Iran again in the future.
Yeah, okay, great. All right, good day, everyone. We are here again with friends of the show, Vanessa, Beeley, and Fiorella, Isabel. We invited you guys on because you always have really, really good conversations one-on-one in which I can find myself. I won't speak for Peter, but I'm pretty sure Peter can find himself for a big part in it as well. And I saw your discussion, your latest discussion on BRICS and on Russia, and also more of a critical reflection. That's something that we've been doing on this channel as well, also with you guys, by the way. And I noticed that is a very sensitive thing on the left still. Surprising, because we all hope for a better world. That's why we are all very sympathetic also to the global south and also to BRICS. But we don't want to reproduce the same problem as we have now. So the only way to do that is being critical, also being self-critical and critical to the sides that you sympathize with. Otherwise, it will never change. But it doesn't mean that we are nihilistic or something. It doesn't mean that we're like, oh, forget about it, forget about BRICS, forget about the global south and this and that. No, absolutely not. We critically reflect on things such as the BRICS, such as the global south, for example, in relation to Palestine, because we have kind of hope, because we have a kind of, how can you say that, we see an alternative in that block compared to the utter darkness of Western imperialism. And that is a bit what I wanted to talk to you about. Also, I've also noticed, and I think your conversations and maybe also the conversations on our channel have had an effect, because I do see increasingly a more nuanced discussion about BRICS also among people in the global south. For example, I see Chinese here in China talk more critically, wondering, hey, what's going on? There's still trade going on with Israel. So I won't aggrandize ourselves too much, but maybe we have a little bit of an effect. I think that's a very important thing, to have that nuanced discussion, to see if, to hopefully improve, to go towards a little bit of a better world in the future. And now I wanted to ask, have you guys noticed that too? Maybe I can start with you, Vanessa. Have you maybe noticed a kind of a changed and increased nuanced discussion about BRICS in the independent sphere? Am I seeing this right?
I think it's like with every issue over time. Like if I go back to when the regime change war began against Syria, there was years until 2016 of fighting back against people's collective hypnosis that was imposed upon them by Western media, legacy media, soft power, smart power, whole complexes of information feeds that persuaded them that this was not a regime change war, etc. Then you had COVID, the vaccines, and so on. So I think every time you reach a point where you're challenging people's cognitive dissonance or their biases or their hope in something, their savior complex, you're going to hit a brick wall for a period of time. And then at a certain point, if you continue in presenting the information in a civilized manner without trying to isolate people, without trying to antagonize people, you stay away from the kind of gladiatorial debates that are deliberately incited on social media, and you just maintain the information feed and the rational, logical breakdown of what is actually happening. You reach a point where people actually start listening. And at that point, they actually start questioning. Now, there is a danger, which I think we're all trying to avoid, where people then turn against what gave them hope to suddenly say, oh, well, then it's pointless. We might as well just give up because there's no alternative. And what's the point in even fighting? What's the point in speaking out? What's the point in trying to change something? But that is the whole point, is that if you believe in humanity evolving rather than devolving, you have to keep going. And it's not because you're on the left. It's not because you're a Leninist. It's not because you're a Trotskyite. It's not because you belong to any political identity, because that's another thing that people use as a weapon against you, is to try and partition the debate into some kind of accusing you of having some kind of political identity that they can then use to degrade your arguments, right? That's another aspect of what goes on when people are being challenged. And that's fine. But at some point, people start to understand that actually this is correct. It's not as if we're not holding the West to account. But the West isn't going to do anything to change what's happening in the region and in Palestine. The BRICS countries still have that power. They still have 40% of the world's population. If those populations can understand that their governments need to change their policies in order to enable parts of the world to actually survive and for there to be real progression as humanity, as mankind, then there is still a chance. That's the thing. There is still a chance with the BRICS countries for change. There's no chance for change, not for many generations. Fee, I don't know if you have that same opinion. In the West, we're going to have to wait a very long time. I'm not saying it's not coming from within the populations themselves, but they're still being heavily manipulated, right? And the divide and rule tactics are now being turned against Western populations. We're seeing it in the US with the assassination of Charlie Kirk. We're seeing it in the UK with the weaponization of migration and the new nationalist fervor, etc., right? But that's the whole point. Why we're talking about this is because within the BRICS nations, there's still hope for change. There's still hope for an end to genocide, a prevention of genocide, and adherence to international law, even though we know that international law is completely perverted and compromised by Western hegemony, and by that I also include the whole Zionist bloc. But still, there is still an opportunity for change, because not all of Russia, I saw a very strong argument on a Russian debating TV channel, I think yesterday, where the guy was going crazy at the guy who was supporting Israel. The same in China. You see it from individuals, from academics, and so on. So I think the whole point is we're not trying to destroy hope. We're trying to give hope. We're trying to say, by holding these countries to account, there is potential for them to act against what is happening in Palestine, Lebanon, Syria, Iraq, Yemen, and potentially Iran again in the future.
Yeah. It reminds me of an interview we just had, and we will post it soon. A man called Walden Bellow, a professor from the Philippines, also an anti-imperialist activist, a very, very fascinating man. And he said the same thing. I mean, he is from the global south. He is very positive about the development of the global south and about BRICS. But the first thing he also said, if nothing happens and if people don't push it into a progressive direction, he said, then it will be just like always with capital, it will be monopolized by the ruling classes. And I think he says a very good thing there. You need that open discussion. You need that open debate about how can you push it into a progressive direction if you want it to be something, an alternative to what we are seeing now with the West. And I like what you just said, Vanessa. That is the whole driver behind our critical discussions. It's not like, oh, we wanna bash BRICS or something. No, it is exactly because we see that glimmer of hope in an alternative to the complete depravity of Western uncivilization and imperialism. So I don't know, Fiorella, maybe you have some thoughts. You live in Russia. How do you see these things playing out?
Oh, yeah. So I live in Russia, and I've been going to the US a lot. And what I notice about the Russian people as a whole is, as Vanessa was saying, they're definitely not just one generic thing that we're getting from a lot of people who are only stuck in their Western enclave of expats that live in Russia, and that only have this certain type of political narrative that they're pushing. We're seeing a lot of for example, pro-Russia, pro-BRICS people start, in my opinion, shifting to try to get the support of people like in the Trump administration or towards the right. It's very interesting. This is also based on, for example, the conservative values that the United States has been pushing in terms of, the going after the quote woke, going after the quote LGBTQ whatever agenda, And so that's been the driving force of a lot of these political connections. And so beyond that, though, there is a population that, especially a younger population, that is much more left-leaning and much more also open to the vulnerabilities that, for example, NATO is pushing in terms of trying to get these people on their side. And the reason I'm talking about this is because there is an awareness, a growing awareness of what Israel is, and a growing awareness of just the Zionism that exists way beyond the United States. It exists in Russia. It exists in many governments that right now are existing throughout the world, many states with power. And when I go to the US and Westerners, particularly a lot of leftists, talk about BRICS, they come at it from a very ideological standpoint, it's a standpoint that's driven in theory more than anything. It's something that it's just, there is no room for deviation from, because they feel like they have to do it, because if they don't do it, then they're being bad Western leftists. And I just got a comment recently on one of the people that was watched, or apparently didn't watch our podcast, was basically saying, though you Western left, you're just criticizing people you shouldn't be criticizing. And this is a common reoccurring thing when it comes to the so-called anti-imperialist left that I've been dealing with, is they're afraid to even say anything remotely critical of Russia or China, because they don't want that to seem like they're trying to dictate how these governments should or shouldn't exist, which I can agree with that. Like, I don't want to come in to say Russia and say you need to do things this way because I think this. But what I will say on that is, a lot of the times they are not as aware of the internal aspect of, for example, US foreign policy or UK's or NATO's. Like, they don't understand the intricacies, and they shouldn't have to, because they're not from our countries. If we're coming to another country and we're coming from another anti-imperialist perspective, we have a great understanding from the mechanisms, especially when it comes to the intelligence apparatus, that is so it's just so invasive all over the world of the United States, and in general, the UK as well, and Mossad. So when I'm coming at it, I'm being very critical of the United States and what their capabilities are. So when people are so hesitant to even remotely criticize BRICS in terms of how they say BRICS, the whole multipolar world order that they talk about, is supposed to be another world order. This is what they say. It's different than the existing one. And if I see genuinely, truthfully, that it's not acting different, that the problem with our world right now is a lack of humanity that's been manifested in this nearly 2-year Holocaust that people are still debating about, that a lot of these pundits that are now what I call the new alternative mainstream media, that are now basically making a lot of money off of being, hating Israel. But really behind that, there is nothing else more than a capitalist driven, a social media influencer driven type of mindset. For me, this is the conversation I've been having, is that motivations matter and why you do things matter. So if, for example, BRICS is not going to actually be in opposition to the biggest genocide of our time, and if they're not going to do what they say they do, what they say they stand for, then to me, that's even worse, because I know what to expect from the United States. We know what to expect from the West. We know how they are. We know that they're enabling this. We know that they are part of this, that they need, in a way, this Zionism, which is very much tied to this Christian Zionism, which is very much tied to this fundamentalist ideology, this very evil, dark ideology of supremacy that they're trying to push all over the world. If we know that it's that it's that important for us to oppose that, then if there is a chance, as Vanessa was saying, to actually overcome that, we need to be critical. We need to be the ones pushing the opportunities we have to face that. Otherwise, what's going to happen is you're just going to have multiple powers that pretty much behave as immorally, as completely just devoid of humanity as the West was doing. And perhaps they're a little bit more cooperative. Perhaps it is more of a soft power. Perhaps they're just, they have the facade down of how they are. But at the end of the day, behind the scenes, they are still acting in a very capitalist, very selfish type of way where there is no equity. There is not going to be more equity in this world. It's only the powerful now. So now we add, in addition to the West, we're adding China, we're adding Russia, we're adding perhaps India, we're adding these Saudi Arabia. I mean, how can I trust that BRICS as an institution will be any different when they're remodeling everything after the UN, which is completely just defanged? It's been useless under this Holocaust that we're seeing. And how can I trust BRICS if they're just mirroring that, and if they're going to mirror the same in action? We can't even suggest that as powerful states, China and Russia, should do something more than what they're doing. Not even just that they should at least stop the economic relationships that they have with a genocidal entity. How is that so much to ask? And we just always constantly get back, well, you're just, you're blaming them. It's like, no, we're not. We very much know who's to blame here. But if you are different, that's like saying like, oh, like we're just going to continue acting the same as our enemies. Like I'm just going to turn into the same type of criminal in order to get ahead. Right. So this is, I feel like, a very philosophical moment we're in, where I think there's just a clashing of philosophical values, because for a lot of the media that's out there, for a lot of the commentators, podcasters, politicians, the ends do justify the means. They believe like, well, China and Russia need to get ahead. And so they're acting as they need to in order to attain the power and attain the influence that they have, because they've been so long under Western hegemony that it's they're just trying to get there. But once they get there, they're going to actually do something, right? They're actually going to act against the West. They're really actually going to be different. But that's the same as any evolution with a human being. That's what I used to hear about, say, going into the Democratic Party and changing it from the inside. That's basically what you're advocating. You're advocating that they become that evil that they're supposed to defeat. And then they're going to remember everything that they were fighting for and be different. Well, that's not how it happens. What ends up happening is that you turn into that which you were supposed to be different from. And that's what I see happening right now when it comes to BRICS. And if there is no criticism, and if there is no, and it's constructive, we're not, like, as we've all been saying, we're not being destructive, then there, it's just going to continue. And it's not popular to say these things. I think, there are more people now talking about it as usual, but like, is it to this depth? No, they're still afraid of talking about it because it doesn't get you, the clicks and the likes and the social media status to talk about, I can say, oh my God, BRICS countries it's a new world. China, Russia, they're going to defeat the hegemonic West. I can make 20 videos titled like all these things about that.
You'll get a lot of subscribers and you'll get a lot of views.
Yeah,
I've seen it.
But that's the new thing though, right? Isn't that the new thing? So my point is, it's become almost popular on the other end to just feed on this other side. But with the nuance, that's never popular. And I think that's our job right now, is to go deep into that nuance.
It's interesting because when after Vanessa spoke, I was thinking, actually, I am a little more hopeful about the West because we're having the boomer generation die off, the people who grew up with legacy media and absorbed, the standard narratives. And now we're having younger generations who grew up with the internet and the diversity of perspective on the internet. So for that reason, I'm a little more hopeful. But then Fiorella's comments made me think back to the Herman and Chomsky propaganda model, where I always thought that the one of the factors in that model, the FLAC, influence of FLAC, that is audience pressure, organized groups, complaining about coverage and threatening boycotts, etc. I always thought that was the weakest part or the weakest element in the model. Like that certainly had an effect, but it seemed to have much less of an effect than the other factors. And given what you've said, I wonder, I'm still very disconnected from like the YouTube media ecosystem. But I wonder if in this ecosystem, FLAC is actually one of the more powerful filters, not just the worry about negative attention, but the desire for positive attention, clicks, likes, etc., blah, 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 creating, audience capture. But leaving that aside, I would just say to people,
effect,
yeah, I would just say to people like who are recently getting into politics and they're, developing their worldview, because there's a hell of a lot. Like I was a teenager on the internet, like very precocious and acting like I was an adult talking about politics and whatnot. But, there's a lot of people on the internet that were like me. They're teenagers who are exploring their political identity. They're developing it in the first place. They're learning about politics for the first time. So I would just tell those people that if you recently got into politics and you were seeing a lot of videos talking about, we already have a multipolar world order and BRICS is going to save the world, that's fine. But, as you develop your understanding, you've got to get a little more realistic and understand that people are hopeful about BRICS, not because right now it's in the position that it needs to be. I mean, look at the constituent members of BRICS. Like India is in a dire state. It's controlled by a literal fascist party, a political party out of a fascist movement that has been incredibly successful. And by the way, I should say the left should learn from the RSS in India. I think they're brilliant. They didn't even get into politics for the first few decades of their existence. They were focusing solely on spreading their ideas and their ideology throughout society through countless numbers of organizations. But, it's terrible what they've used it for. It's a great tactic that we should probably learn from. But, India, not in a good place. Russia, not in a good place. I mean, I was so depressed to hear a story of a friend of mine in India who went to volunteer for the Russian army because he was a communist and he still associated the Russian Federation with the USSR. And I'm just, it's so depressing to hear that. But for people that are just getting in, like, don't let your disappointment about what BRICS currently is ruin your optimism of the will. You can have pessimism of the intellect all you want, but you have to have optimism of the will so that you continue acting. Because the reason why BRICS or any other organization, the G77 in the UN, the only reason that there's hope there is what it could become. And in order for it to become what it needs to become, we need a lot of active, organized people pushing in that direction wherever they are in the world. So all I would just say is don't get discouraged if you're just now, coming to the realization that the very fantastical videos and whatnot talking about BRICS is already, the kind of the
BRICS Hallelujah videos, what I call them.
There's this.
I call them BRICS. I call them BRICS Hallelujah videos.
There's this trope in the U.S.
Peter,
called the magical Negro that is like this racist trope that is common throughout novels and movies.
Yeah,
where it's like this other, the black person who is mysterious, and all of a sudden he comes in and he saves the day out of nowhere and he solves all the problems. Like that seems to me like what has happened in a lot of people's minds, and I just really don't want them to lose hope and become despondent and nihilistic.
But Peter, and I'll give it to you, Vanessa, just a small remark. But Peter, exactly what you're saying, even though we have pessimism of the intellect, you have optimism of the will. That's exactly the reason why we are discussing this. Because otherwise we would just give up. Why would we even why would we even have a nuanced discussion about this and critique if we wouldn't believe it would help anything? It's exactly why we think there is some hope there. So we want, you know, we want to contribute to some kind of different direction if that is possible. So in that sense, I think we really align with what you just said. But go ahead, Vanessa.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think what you described, Peter, to some degree is this savior complex, right? It's people need to feel they can abrogate responsibility to some kind of savior entity, which is going to change the world for them. And that's how the West was so successful with the whole NGO complex, because it gave people a stakeholding effectively in the destruction of the countries that they thought they were going to be helping, right? But that it was another form of savior complex. It was another form. Now you even have apps where people can just donate on an app on their phone to their chosen charity or their chosen NGO to go and feed people in Africa or give people in Africa the vaccine, which is probably going to kill them anyway, right? Depopulation, etc., etc. But this is the thing. People like to abrogate responsibility. And while, you know, I would happily say, me as an individual, what can I change? But I can change myself. And if everybody is prepared to take responsibility for what is happening in the world and change themselves in a positive direction, it's amazing the knock-on effect that can have, right? And that is what is really important to understand and what Fee said about it depends so much on the motivation. It's not only about the flack or the perspective of wanting more likes and more clicks and more monetization. It's also the fear of censorship. It's the fear of being peer reviewed in a negative way, as you said, right? If you look at the academic world, how many of them are actually speaking out about what's going on because they're terrified of being badly peer reviewed, right? It filters down through all sectors of analysis and political understanding, intellectual understanding, philosophical, ideological understanding, in my opinion. And I want to take the example of Jeremy Corbyn and how people talk about how he was brought down by the Zionist movement. He was, to a degree, but he's repeating now the same mistakes that he made before. And for me, the most disappointing thing about him, he was going to get destroyed anyway. But why didn't he take a stand before he got destroyed? If he had taken a stand, the population of the UK would be 100 times more aware of what's going on now than they are. He could have made a massive change if he, as an individual, had maintained his integrity, his morals, his humanity, instead of throwing his own colleagues under the bus for having the integrity to stand by their principles and their ethics. And now he's making exactly the same mistake again. He has the same advisors. He's making the same mistakes.
Yeah, I agree with that.
In my opinion, when you look at BRICS, like, what is the fear here? It's like Susan Abelhauer spoke about this learned helplessness, where no one wants to act first. But at the end of the day, what happens? Revolution doesn't come from a majority. It comes from a minority. It comes from someone who inspires the majority eventually, right? So it's only going to take one domino for that whole effect to come in. That's what I'm saying. It's only going to take someone in influence in Russia or in China, let's say. Let's take those two, because I'm certainly not going to hold out hope for India or Egypt or UAE or many of the other countries. But it's only going to take one action by China or by Russia. I would put sort of greater influence with China, to be honest, and greater opportunity with China for it to suddenly have an effect. And I don't want to see the Jeremy Corbyn thing happen all over again, but on a much, 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 much bigger scale, where the lives of Palestinians are at stake, because we have now such a small window of opportunity to stop what is going on in Gaza. There's no internet now. There's no communication. There are no journalists left. We don't know the extent to which the massacre is now increasing. This is the final solution, where Palestinians in Palestine are going to be wiped out, where Palestinians in Lebanon are going to be wiped out, where Palestinians in Syria are going to be wiped out. The resistance is going to be wiped out. And eventually, even Palestinians in diaspora are going to be targeted. They're already being targeted through legal methods in the UK. British Palestinian doctors are being persecuted now in the UK by the Zionist movement. So it's a long-term plan to effectively disappear Palestinians from the world, not only Palestinians, all those that support them. So we don't have the luxury of time. Like a lot of people say to me, like the comment that Fee was talking about, we understand like BRICS countries have to act with discretion. Discretion about what? About the fact that the country they're supporting and doing trade with and supplying arms to are committing a genocide.
Yeah,
a
and
Holocaust.
doing the same thing that happened to most of their ancestors. I mean, that's something that, as a son of an Algerian who lost three who my father lost three uncles in the fight against colonialism, French colonialism. I on a moral and ethical and emotional and psychological level, I cannot understand it. I cannot understand it, and I find. You say something very important, and I've also been wrestling with that idea. You say learned helplessness. And I think that's so important because I'm very interested in a phenomenon called internalized colonialism or colonial mentality, which is a psychological effect and often after effect of colonialism, which you see a lot around the world. And I think we can see this also as a form of internalized colonialism, still that learned helplessness, still not the idea that you can take that step against the big bad West to finally put an end to something or to say until here and no further. And this goes to something very fundamental, and I think you guys resonate with that as well when I hear you two talk together on the show as well. A lot of people who say, yeah, but what do you expect Russia to do? What do you expect BRICS to do? Why do this? What happens here is that people are defending the inaction of powerful states because they feel that reality, that realpolitik, that structural reality is a reality we need to accept. Otherwise, you would not defend it. I am of the position, of the philosophical, moral, and ethical position. I do not want to live in a world like that. So I'm not going to accept the premise that because they are this or because they are that, they have to accept the genocide. That's not the kind of world I want to live in. So I'm going to critique it. Because if I say, yeah, but you know what? If they do this, then it's too dangerous, or maybe they get threatened, or maybe this or that, or that. I am actually rationalizing that there is a structural reality that you cannot change that makes you accept genocide. You understand what people need to think a little bit deeper. What does it mean that I defend the inaction of powerful states? What does it actually mean? It literally means that you accept it as a fact that powerful states cannot stop a genocide. That there is a structural reality that is too threatening for them, that they must always make a decision either after 2 years to support a genocide. Because if you are trading with a country, you're supporting genocide. And as long as you defend that, you see that as a fact, and you do not see a world in your mind where you say, no, I believe and I want and I believe there is a different world possible. Because if you believe that, you would start critiquing right now. You understand what I mean? This is a deep moral kind of frustration and wrestling I have. I wrestle with these things, and yeah, I don't know. Peter, you wanted to jump in?
Yeah, I think it's important to recognize the difference between explanation and defense. Defense is when you would say, okay, this is the way that the world structure is, and this is also the way it should be. There's no other way it could be. It's the way it should be. Then all countries should just seek to maximize their national self-interest, and that's just good. Explanation is saying this is the way the global system currently is, and it's essential to know what the reality actually is so that you have a better chance of changing it in the direction that you want it to be changed. But I think the kind of like emotional, on the emotional level, when you're really seeking to have a change immediately, it's very easy to kind of blur the distinction between explanation and defense. I push the explanation side because I think it's absolutely essential for people who want to change the system to know intimately well exactly how it works. Because if you don't know how it works, it's unlikely that you're going to be able to find the right lever to attempt to change it. And that's really my only point there.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with that. I mean, I have nothing to disagree with, to be very honest. I'm just saying that you can explain, even I can explain it, but I'm not accepting it. I'm not saying that it's like, oh, I can explain it because they feel threatened or this or that. We are witnessing a complete people being erased from the earth. And according to the latest numbers, probably 680,000 Palestinians have been killed, among whom 500,000 children. And if massive juggernauts of states around the world cannot stop trading with the perpetrators, I feel there's something terribly wrong going on in this world. There's something really, really wrong, and we really need to speak up about it. You know, I'm not going to sit here and saying, yeah, realpolitik, I understand it, so yeah, we got to accept it. It's just that what kind of, who wants children in a world like that? I'm serious. Like,
Exactly.
who wants to put children in a world like that? If you can get eradicated by powerful states just because, yeah, well, hello, that's the way the world works. You know what I mean? Fiorella, you want to jump in?
Yeah, well, so the thing about realpolitik is accepting and understanding like what is actually happening. And I think in actuality, pretending that BRICS and China and Russia are still as great as people think they are in terms of the ideologies that they placed on them, in terms of this very much invented idea that they are beyond reproach, that they are just beacons that are never ever to be criticized. I don't think that's realpolitik. I think the realpolitik is accepting the lack of moral backbone that they have right now in terms of facing this Holocaust head on and stopping the relationship with Israel. We've seen smaller countries do it. We've seen less powerful countries really actually push back against Israel, but somehow China and Russia won't do it because they can't, because they're trying to achieve this great defeat of hegemony. Well, how is that possible if you can't act on this? And we can even go further selfishly when it comes to the genocide, because what is next then if we don't stop this as a whole? If the entire world and the people with the supposed power and supposed moral virtue that are going to be different than the West can't stop it, then who's next? Who's the next on the chopping block? Because you know that's coming for everybody else. What is being done to Palestinians, what is being done to people in Gaza is going to come for everybody else in the world eventually. And that is just one thing that I can wholeheartedly say I firmly believe in. Because if we as a people allow this to continue, it's just going to spread beyond that. And it's already, this mentality is already spreading beyond that. People, of course, won't believe it until it's at their doorstep, but that is where we're going in that world. It's not going to be much different. The world I see coming is actually a world of a global elite that is going to continue robbing resources and fighting over resources. But at the end of the day, the people that see the most consequences of that are going to be the general populations of the world, the everyday people. And if you don't really care about Palestinians or Gaza, because coming to the United States, you're just slapped in the face with where they are in terms of politics, in terms of evolution of understanding of the global world and how it is. And there's just a very lack of understanding beyond the center of the world. We are the main characters, so nobody else really matters unless it's, happening to us. Well, that sentiment is essentially what is allowing this to continue. But that sentiment is gone also when you realize that you're just the next one on the chopping block. And I wanted to comment in all of this in relation to the Charlie Kirk thing, because I've just been so just angry and frustrated with how U.S. Americans are so just self-centered on this entire thing, and how supposedly the biggest anti-Zionist voices have stopped entirely talking about Gaza, stopped entirely talking about what's happening in Palestine and everything that is going on. As Vanessa's saying, the final solution, none of that's being talked about if you're in the United States. The only thing that's being talked about is Charlie Kirk and how he was such a threat to Israel that, they just went and killed him. Because also, by the way, Donald Trump is a victim. And Donald Trump is afraid of Israel, even though we have the most Zionist administration in our history, even though Miriam Adelson is practically in the room with Donald Trump at all times, even though Donald Trump and Netanyahu have consistently proven that this idea that they have a feud is completely false. And Vanessa and I have been talking about this. And then people just, when it completely just destroyed this idea that there's a feud between the United States and Israel, they just pretend they never said that. And now what we have in the primary discussion in the United States is a new class of media that is the alternative mainstream media that's made a lot of money off of opposing Zionism, into a degree, off of saying very theatrical, very, just very attention-grabbing things that, for example, are being led by the likes of Candace Owens, Tucker Carlson, and all of these people that came from mainstream media and are somehow allowed to say a lot of the things that everybody else gets banned for saying. And they are pushing this narrative that Charlie Kirk saw the light and this is why he was killed, and that it's not possible that he was killed by any means, that it absolutely was Israel. And then you have, like the leading charge of this is also being pushed by the gray zone, that one article and anecdotal evidence that there's absolutely no doubt that Israel killed Charlie Kirk, because in the last few days he said some things against Israel. But in every podcast that I've seen Kirk in, and everything that I've seen him talk in, he has always been extremely pro-Israel. And the mild pushback that he gave is just normal. People need to learn. In the United States, what's happened is it's become popular to have an anti-Israel position. And that's always been a popular position to some on the right, because for many reasons. It's been, saying the quote, Jews are in charge of everything, and all of these things that are being said. And in what's happened to Gaza, there's been a sort of emergence of certain figures that were previously actually white nationalists and white supremacists that have sort of joined in the conglomerate of being anti-Israel, and that's been equated to anti-Zionism. And so they've made like a living off of this. And so you have among that elements of the right. And it's hard for people outside the US to understand this, but you have all of this mishmash, hodgepodge of just supposedly anti-Zionist sentiment. And out of that, you've had a lot of content creators become extremely popular. A lot of social media influencers say that they're the most anti-Zionist. But what happened when Charlie Kirk was killed was that these people started policing everybody's social media when there wasn't a eulogy creating a saint of Kirk. And the reason why this is so important is because it directly affects what we're talking about. It is part of the same mechanism of, well, if they're all saying the same thing against Israel, then they're on our side and this is good and you should want more of this. But for me, it's like the motivation behind it matters. The reasons why people are doing this matters, that the genuine nature of what they're doing matters. I just don't buy that a person who has been just literally in the audience making fun of dead Palestinians, who has completely, not just on Palestinians, but pretty much on every minority possible, but especially recently, since the October 7th attacks, and
I saw it.
almost these 2 years. Yeah, if he has been
Shocking.
just very awful on it, suddenly in the last month, he said some things against Israel. I don't see that as anything more than healthy pushback, because in the United States, what is happening is that people are, because of Israel's own actions, building a hatred towards Israel, building an awareness of the Zionist invasion of the United States. But when you try to make that separate from the United States, when you try to make the victim out of people who really got rich out of hate, out of promoting hate and division, like Trump, like the Charlie Kirks of the world, what you're saying is that is separate from what Israel is doing. That is separate from Zionism as a whole. And it's not. We enable it. In the United States, our government is fully captured. It is enabling it. It's being ultra-Zionist. It's spreading all of this. There is no victimhood that's applied there. They are 100% a part of it. And the anti-Zionism, by and large, is coming from a clout-chasing mentality, that because it's now become popular to also have people scream and shout against Zionism, but really receive very few of the consequences that the majority of people who are also talking about it, and the people, of course, the people in Palestine themselves, the people in the resistance regions are experiencing. So then it becomes only about the Western pundits that are somehow the victims of this, and the entire Palestinian, just the Palestinian suffering and everything that's happening is entirely forgotten. And if you point it out the same way as if you point out the reality of BRICS, you're a Zionist, you're being divisive, you're being this. And I think that's part of it. I think that is part of the intelligence apparatus, the controlled opposition aspect, the trying to create a rift. Yeah, it's absolutely
reminds
building
me
a
of it reminds me of the debates on. I remember like years ago. It reminds me of the Tulsi Gabbard debates. In those days, I already saw it. I said, this is a pro-war on terror warmonger, and they did not. I was not allowed to say this. How dare you, blasphemy! And guess what? We're 10 years later, and now everybody parrots it. And I was there. You see, it's everything becomes that game of red versus blue, the yellow flag versus red flag. You know what I mean? Like a football game. Everybody identifies with a person, identifies with a group. But we were just talking about that, Vanessa. People start investing in an identity also, and then you're not allowed to say anything about somebody that they identify with or a group they identify with, and then you fall for the divide and conquer game of imperialism. It's very subtle.
Yeah, but
for me, it's sorry, go on.
It's just a slight comment to correct Fiorella. You clearly haven't read the latest Barack Ravid article, in which he describes how angry Trump is at Bibi and how he used curse words in his talk.
Right, yeah. Yeah, I know. It's and for me, I mean, I remember when it happened, and Fee and I were kind of talking about it, and I said, this is just narrative building, what's going on. And if you look at what's actually happened, as Fee said, everyone's talking about Charlie Kirk and no one's paying attention to what's happening here in the region, right? The final solution is literally being pushed through. There's a ground invasion in Gaza. Settlements are being built over Palestinian land. Palestinians are being slaughtered also in the West Bank. In Syria, Israel has taken more territory than it ever has in its entire history. There are massacres ongoing in Syria, by the Al-Qaeda elements that are backed by the US and Israel. And no one's paying any attention to this. They're all focused in on Charlie Kirk. And if you don't agree that Israel killed Charlie Kirk, then, you're out in the rain, as he said. It's insane how people don't recognize when a narrative is being built to turn them against one another. And that's after what happened with COVID, which for me was the most, I love how people kind of Western commentators on what's happening in Palestine, and I know you guys have covered this, but, they'll point their fingers at the Arabs in inverted commas and sort of say, oh, well, I give up on them because, they're just dividing amongst themselves. Well, hi, guys. Have you actually watched what you're doing in your own societies consistently? We're human beings. And this is how the ruling classes actually manipulate us and divide us. The only thing is that the focus has been on this region for 100 years, right? And so they've been subjected to 100 years of this kind of manipulation. And the fact that there is still a cohesive resistance axis in this region is incredible for me. And the fact is, why? Why does a country like Yemen continue, despite the battering that they've had from 2015 onwards, and the UN engineered siege and blockade of 23 million Yemenis, right? Is because the only judgment they fear is that of God if they don't do anything from a moral perspective to prevent what is going on in Palestine. And that's what we're missing. We're actually missing whether we believe in God or we believe in some kind of moral paradigm. It doesn't matter. It really doesn't matter what your ideology is, but that should be the core that is driving your reaction to what is going on.
Yeah,
if that makes
capitalism
sense.
killed it all. Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
basically,
Capitalism
yeah.
killed it all. I remember
Yeah, your
reading.
article was great on that, actually.
Oh, you were freezing up for a moment. I didn't hear what you
Sorry.
said, but I
No,
heard
the
you said
article you wrote about global capitalism was
Oh, yeah.
really good.
I remember reading. I remember when I was doing my PhD back in the day, and I in those days I read a lot of work from Chris Hedges, and even though I I have my critiques of Chris Hedges, he writes fantastically, and
Yeah, he does.
and there's one thing I always found very convincing what he said, and I agree with that, and that is that one of the biggest problems we have in the West is that we lack that spirituality. A kind of he also says it doesn't need to be a religion. It doesn't need to be, but just it can be with nature, that spiritual connection you have with life or with the world or with nature, which drives you to be humane, to be good. And that has been, yeah, you could say that has been systematically eradicated in our societies. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Definitely. Division between communities, division of children from family, division of any kind of community belief. And I mean, I can say from a personal experience how the UK changed. I left it in 2000 and I haven't gone back. But the UK that I knew, Britain that I knew pre-2000, was a country where people helped each other. That has changed to such a degree. And Fee, I don't know if you can, I know you're a lot younger than me, but if you can say that even in your experience in the US, for example, here in this region, there is such a strong sense of community. And in a sense, that's also what we're fighting for as activists, journalists, analysts, and so on, is when you see that level of dignity and humanity and community here in this region, in Palestine, in Lebanon, in Syria, despite everything that's been thrown at them, because they have this connection, this spiritual ideology that keeps them. How do Palestinians keep resisting? Because they have this absolute core belief in something greater than ourselves. And you're so right that is a huge element of why we've lost ourselves to some degree in the West, in this kind of capitalistic, consumerist environment that's been engineered for us to exist in.
Yeah,
if that makes sense.
as a recovering religious fanatic, I have
Very
an
much.
allergy to
Makes a lot of sense.
I have an allergy to the word spiritual, but I think I can reinterpret it in a different way. Like you need to have a sense of the transcendent, a sense of awe, and for me, that's nature. That's that's existence. That's the universe. There's just so much to be in awe of, and yeah, people do need that sense of the transcendent. And certainly community. And that's something that in the US, at least from the statistics you can read, loneliness is off the charts. People report not having enough friends, not having relationship partners. Sexual activity is lower today than it was 30, 40 years ago. Like all of these indices of just living in a society and having personal connections, it's just been so degraded.
Yeah, and even sexual connection, even sexual behavior and sexual connections is lost. It's kind of spiritual. You don't like the word. I'll use spiritual connection. That's also something I got from Chris Hedges, and I found it very convincing. Even though in the beginning I was like, old man, with his morals, but he makes a very good point that when you see the kind of sex, the kind of porn that is very popular now, it's very domineering, it's violent, it's very imperialist, you can almost say, you know what I mean, instead of a very warm, deep connection that is what
it's destructive.
Also a way,
it's destructive.
Yeah, very destructive and violent and grabbing the hair and that kind of stuff. It's very popular kind of pornographic websites and stuff. And I remember reading that when Hedges wrote about that, and I was like, I started to think about more and more and more how that correlates with the kind of society that you live in. What arouses people. And then I was like, yeah, look at Israel with these detention centers where women and girls and boys and men are mass sexually abused in the most violent ways. So they're just forcing the most horrible things. And I'm like, that's that kind of that's that correlation between sexual depravity and the kind of society that you live in. And you see it among the Israelis and the sick stuff that is going on. Yeah.
Yeah,
Fiorella.
we're like the United States is a sick society, and everything that's been happening is reflective of that society. I mean, the entire thing internally is collapsing, and you feel that energy when you're there, like when you feel like people are just so preoccupied in trying to survive and trying to not get sick and trying to pay their rent and trying not to go insane. And so the politics is extremely reflective of that at the domestic level. And of course, when it comes to our foreign policy, it is all of it about destruction. It's all about exploitation. It's all about lacking any sort of responsibility within ourselves. It's always somebody else's fault. And it is done so you blame, for example, the other person instead of blaming the people that are at fault. And so when we talk about what's happening in the US is this very much hateful culture, and right now that's become extremely popular. I think we'll have to talk about this another time, but the idea of hating the immigrants and them being tied to now in the United States being tied to Iran, being tied to the Middle East, and being called terrorists. And now if you disagree with
Venezuela,
the fact that or Venezuela, or if you disagree with the fact that Charlie Kirk wasn't a saint, then you're also a terrorist. And the surveillance state is now the right that was supposed to be for free speech, that was supposed to be critical of the deep state, is now supporting the bashing of people for having a different opinion. And so you learn that at the end of the day, a lot of these people that follow that want somebody to save them, whether it's Donald Trump, whether it's, someone on the quote left like Bernie Sanders, which reminds me a lot of what you were mentioning, Vanessa, in the UK with Jeremy Corbyn. There is no actual pushback. There is no actual stance against the evil. It's just politically expedient to do this or that. It's advised to do this or that. And I go back to the fact that this is why we're a reflection of where we are as a society. People are not there still. Even when you look at the Western left, particularly the ones in the United States that are criticizing Zionism or criticizing Israel, they're doing it from a very self-centered position. They're not doing it because it's something that is greater than themselves. We have been for the longest time in the United States an individualistic society, which is why what you're talking about, that whether you call it spirituality or fascination or awe, that's lacking. That collectivist mindset that I see more often in the East, whether it's China, whether it's Russia, also Latin America, and that I see where families come together, where they help each other out. That is lacking, because there is also a disconnect from the other, from your neighbor, from everybody else. You're taught to fear people instead and look out for yourself. And that mentality has basically been expanded into not just the United States, but it's been pushed out beyond. And so that is just reflective of how we view things. And this is why I have such an aversion to the media world that I've been seeing in the US that's just not authentic. And again, like, authenticity, I think, is something that it's not necessarily black and white. It's not something you can just make up. It's intrinsic. And I think there isn't a way to describe good and right and bad and good and evil as something intrinsic that we can all see. And I think we've been robbed of that ability to be able to listen to that voice, because we've just gotten so desensitized from what's happening in Palestine and Gaza that people almost would rather discuss in a very theatrical way the pros and cons of genocide in Gaza, and would rather watch somebody debate someone on that while eating popcorn as a form of entertainment than actually do something to oppose it, than actually attack the levers of power. And we are so far from that in the United States. It is very clear to me after being here that we are extremely far from that, that the only hope I can have is in the alternative countries that are rising in power, which is why I go back to the BRICS, and which is why we go back to our role in ensuring that there is pushback, and ensuring that people also all around the world know that if we're going to believe in something, it's got to be a genuine, real thing. If it's not, then everything that we're doing will just completely actually backfire against us, because you're going to have the other side come in and say, well, they're not doing anything different. They're going to use these things against you. And it's going to make it harder for the people of the world who are being affected by all these things to actually fight back. So we have to be a tool to amplify the message that it's not about somebody saving us. It's about us saving ourselves, and pushing the powerful to do that, and pushing people within our own societies, within our own worlds, to really see the reality. That's the reality. The reality is seeing the world as it is, and taking that understanding and pushing back to make it something better.
Yeah, very, very, very well said. Very well said, Fiorella. And if I can just make a comment about what you just said, we often do not realize how gradually our humanity and our societies are degrading to the extent that when I was in the 90s, when I was a kid, I remember, because somebody in a show primed this in me. In those days, you had like the video stores, like where you can rent a videotape.
Blockbusters.
Yeah, there was the 90s, the beautiful 90s. And you had these very, there are two examples. You had these very, we didn't even dare to touch it. It was too scary. You had these kind of snuff movies, but not snuff movies as like the illegal ones, but like movies that showed you very scary stuff. Like somebody was like was shot at an airport, very bloody. That was so extreme. You could just not, you didn't want to watch it. You know what I mean? Most, even adults, they didn't want to watch those kind of documentaries, like bloody documentaries. And you had that very dark corner in the video store that was pornography. Now that always just some random dude would hang out there, and almost nobody went there. You know what I mean? That was like the dark corner of the video store. All that stuff is now just 6 years old see it on their phone. I'm not even kidding you. Like, people browse their phone. They go to any website, social media, and they see pornography, and they see toddlers being blown to bits in Palestine.
Yeah.
I mean, think about it. What has become normalized? And that's why the whole Epstein case should not be.
Yeah.
People should not stop talking about it. Should not stop talking about it. This stuff should be the limit, just like the genocide, of course. Because what can we say? I think we could talk on for hours. I always love talking to you guys and listening to you guys, and these deep moral discussions about the kind of world that we want is so necessary and also cathartic in a way, because there's just so many people who just live like zombies and don't even think about it anymore. You know what I mean? And who can blame them? I mean, it's often also just too painful to think about. Anyway, thank you so much for being on our show again. We will invite you soon on again, I'm sure. And enjoy your day. We are here at the end of the day. So, see you next time.
Yes.
Take care, guys.
Take care. Bye.
Have a good one. Bye.
حبيت القمر طلع القمر اصطناعي شميت الورد طلع الورد بلاستيكي أنا حبيت القمر طلع القمر اصطناعي شميت الورد طلع الورد بلاستيكي تكتيكي تكتيكي